Hello, everyone. This is Alan Murabayashi speaking to you from the PhotoShelter offices here in New York City. I want to thank you for joining us from wherever you are in the world today. And today we have a fantastic webinar with Brian Smith from Miami, a fantastic advertising and commercial photographer. And I haven't told him this before, but two things I admire about Brian. First of all, the guy looks about 10 years younger than he is. I was very shocked to see how old he was. I won't reveal that information. You can do your research yourself. And then the second thing, many of you might know how big a fan I am of search engine optimization. And Brian is one of these guys that has, a relatively generic name, Brian Smith, but Brian is number one when you search for Brian Smith. So that was something that he worked on, and we've had some conversations over the past couple years about SEO, and he's really, really savvy with that. But with that, let me introduce Brian. Brian, how are you?
Thank you, Alan. I'm actually 87 years old, so Alan means I look pretty good for 77. So you never would have guessed. Welcome,
Exactly.
everyone.
We're going to spend just a brief moment of time to talk about what Brian has done in his career, and then we're going to get into the meat of the presentation. But Brian, do you want to talk us through some of the highlights and transitions in your career?
Oh, sure. I started off as a newspaper photographer even back in high school. I started shooting for the local newspaper, the Ames Daily Tribune, and throughout college, on my summers, I would have internships or um, work as a stringer for the wire services or Cincinnati Enquirer, New Orleans Times-Picayune, and that really got me started in the business. The the first magazine photograph I ever had published was when I was 20 years old. One of the photographs that I took the summer that I was working for UPI ended up in Life magazine, which actually came out the first month I was in journalism school at the University of Missouri. So that's kind of a good way to get noticed right off the bat, but also an example of like how you really have to um, strive to find your breaks in this business and um, push to push to get great assignments.
Yeah, and those experiences led to full-time offers, and then you worked for a while at a number of newspapers, and then transitioned into kind of the freelance world as
Yeah,
well.
I worked for the New Orleans Times-Picayune right out of school, and 6 months later got a dream job offer from the Orange County Register, which at the time was one of the first newspapers really using a lot of color, and that led to a chance to shoot the Olympics, and um, that led to my next newspaper job at the Miami Herald. And all this time, I wanted to eventually segue my way into magazines and tried to use newspapers as the springboard to that.
Cool. We have here a picture of a mentor or a hero, and I guess it's a good point to have someone in mind that you aspire to be like, someone who you admire.
Absolutely, I think it's really important to have somebody who you can look up to. And the very first photography book I ever bought was a book of Elliot Erwitt's, and Elliot was always like a really a hero and an inspiration to me. I feel very fortunate to have gotten to know him over the years, and I think he led he led me to realize that photography can be a lot of fun. So he's somebody from the very start who was an inspiration and continues today. So if we can move through, it's one of some of the early work that I started doing. Was sort of inspired by Eliot's work, and I realized that real people in real situations a lot of times are funnier than anything you can dream up. So I think that's an example of sort of opening your eyes to photography and being being able to go out there and enjoy yourself.
Did you always have a sense that you wanted to have this kind of quirky personal vision, or was that something that was influenced by people like Elliot?
I think it's kind of interesting because this I discovered this picture when I was going when somebody was asking like sort of I think basically in a nice way they were asking when did I get to be warped like I am today. So I kind of had to look through and it's like what's the first kind of funny picture that I took, and I came across this photograph that I took when I was in college when I was sent out to shoot people in a pumpkin patch, and um, this mother and son with their watermelons just seem funnier. So that's a case of, one of the great things in photography is to be able to enjoy the world around you.
Do you think they were kind of aware of the irony of the skinny melon versus the
I
round melon?
I think he, if you look at his face, I think he kind of might have gotten it, but
Right.
yeah, it's one of those things. It's like, you just can't make this stuff up. It's reality is so much better.
That's funny. So the title of the presentation really stop waiting for your big break, and one of your points has been there's never like necessarily one single seminal event. It's really a chain of different events.
Well, that's been my experience, and I think a lot of times the reason that we came up with this title is a lot of times people sort of look for that one that's going to propel them along and make their career, and that probably works for some people, but my experience, I think, is the norm, which is that you really don't have that one big break that's a career maker. What you have is a series of small breaks that sort of move you on to the next thing. And if you can string these together into a successful career, they sort of take you to the next level, and then you start working all over again.
And was that something that you were kind of aware of when, you said when you started you wanted to be a magazine photographer. Were you also sort of aware that it was going to be kind of a slow build, or were you looking to hit a home run out of the gate?
No, I mean, part of the other thing is I really loved what I was doing. I was in newspapers at a time that newspapers were really changing, is to have newspapers that published almost everything in color. There wasn't a lot of that. Obviously, USA Today was doing that, but the Orange County Register was one of the first newspapers that particularly ran color, but ran it really, really big. So we would sometimes have full page broadsheet um, photographs in the paper that, essentially that's probably, I'm guessing, like 12 by 20 inches. So it was a great learning ground, and I enjoyed every moment of it. Even though I was looking to the next thing, I was trying to apply every everything that I wanted out of my career to what I was doing right then and there.
So you must have felt like a champ to have a photo in a Life magazine at 20.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of those things. It's like, actually, this was done for the summer when I was working for UPI, and I was a stringer in Cincinnati, and Thurman Munson had crashed his plane up in Canton, Ohio, and I just basically begged my bosses to come up and cover the event, and was at the very end just sort of thrown into the, well, we don't have a place for you. Why don't you shoot people, you know, boarding the bus? And I had one frame of Billy Martin that got a lot of play immediately. It was in the New York Times and was really good. And a month later, I opened up a package from my boss, Terry Bashotti, and like, lo and behold, here it is in Life magazine. So, needless to say, as a college student, I was pretty stoked when that happened.
Were you aware at the time that, like, he's got his Yankees World Championship ring that's like angled perfectly at the camera? Were you aware of all that stuff at the time?
Honestly, Alan, I was shooting this as I was raising the camera to my eye, and
Uh,
there was one frame, and he was gone. And it was like, um, one of the things when you shoot for wire services. This is of course before the day that we can chimp and see that you've got it. So um,
right.
one of the things in shooting for wire services is you hand off the film to a runner. So it's like, when I went back to the motel room where they had a dark room set up, they were already had this print on the drum. So it's like, wow, okay, I guess I did get something out of that.
It's almost like digital. You went back and you saw it.
Yeah, exactly.
This next image you shot in New Orleans.
Yeah, and so really what that led is, it didn't turn things around, but it was sort of the way that I got my next internship at the New Orleans Times-Picayune. And so that's a case of building on what you've done to get to the next thing. And the next thing was a wonderful internship the next summer at the New Orleans Times-Picayune, and just driving around, shooting spot news, enter these things in contests. It's really important. Contests can make or break a career. So, this won in the National Clip Contest and sort of propelled me to, um, actually a job offer with them, which I took up right as soon as I got out of college.
That's an interesting point. I know obviously back in the 80s and in the 90s where digital didn't exist and the internet didn't exist, the clip contests and the NPPA magazine were probably much more significant in that respect. Do you still feel strongly about contest participation?
Well, I absolutely do. It's different for me now. It's that I tend to enter things more like communication arts and PDN's photo annual, but those are things that your peers and people that will hire you look at. So, whatever is the appropriate contest for your demographic, you absolutely have to enter those things.
Then we get to the color part of your career.
Yeah, so then this led to really my dream job, which is one of the photo editors who I worked with in the at the Cincinnati Enquirer had taken a job with the Orange County Register, and Alex Burrows asked me to apply at the Orange County Register, and I went to work for them and worked with a phenomenal director of photography, Ron Mann, as one of the three photographers covering the Olympics for the Orange County Register. And this was probably one of the great learning experiences from newspapers because there were three of us. There were 28 photographers from our competitor, the LA Times, and there was no way that we could be everywhere that they were. So my boss, Ron Mann, had the perfect solution, which was swing for the fences. Don't try for the safe shot. Go out there and shoot something that not everybody else is shooting. So it's kind of a case of going out and making the most of your opportunities um, can really be rewarding throughout your career. And I think that's something that I've always taken to heart. And I think that's one of the things that's really important. Also for people who are directors of photography, encourage the photographers who work for you to swing for the fences and come back with something unusual, and then back them up if they don't go for the safe shot, and come up with something different.
And this was the picture package for which you won a Pulitzer Prize.
Yeah, the three photographers, myself, Rick Rickman, and Hal Stosley, too much to our shock that year, following year, shared the Pulitzer Prize for spot news photography. And I had heard we were a finalist, but absolutely my jaw dropped to the ground when they announced us as a winner. And I think it's just a case of, you know, certainly sports photography is not what you think as Pulitzer Prize winning material, but I think it's a case of, trying and doing something different and covering an event for as an event as opposed to, just trying to be at the finish line everywhere.
And you're 23, 24 years old at this time?
I was 24 when I shot the Olympics, 25 when I won the Pulitzer.
And what was sort of going through your head? Like you've been published in Life magazine at 20, you've won the Pulitzer at 25. Are you thinking, I'm the man at this point?
Well, actually, I was 25 years old, I should put out. So what was really going on through my mind was, is there enough champagne here in the newsroom? So, and fortunately there was, that's another thing. Plan ahead, make sure everybody's taken care of. So, and then
And
that
then 4 years
opportunity,
later,
yeah, that opportunity led to a job at the Miami Herald where I covered all kinds of breaking news like turmoil in Haiti, but also, um, was back at the Olympics 4 years later. This is actually shot for Agency France Presse, and this is Greg Louganis hitting his head on the diving board. And probably the uniqueness of this picture is the fact that back in those old film days, you had to put in brand new batteries in your motor drives to get 3.5 frames a second. And today at 10 frames a second, probably everybody would have this shot, but it's kind of the luck of the motor drive that I was one of very few photographers who caught Greg Louganis hitting his head on the diving board in Seoul.
I remember watching this on the TV, and I remember seeing this image in print. I mean, it's amazing. Ed Hamlin had a question in regards to whether you can elaborate on how contests can make or break a career.
Well, so for instance, this picture that year, I entered in World Press Photo in the Pictures of the Year competitions, and it won first place in sports in both of those competitions. And that's one of those things that ends up being in, you know, the photo annuals today. It would also be on the web. And that's the type of recognition you can't, the best PR you can give or the best kind of social media you can get is PR that you don't have to create for yourself, something that somebody else goes out and spreads the
Right.
word. So I think that's one of the great things about entering contests is they get your name out there and get you in front of the people who, your peers or people who could potentially hire you. I think it's very important.
Which is a good segue. Your cohort in crime from editorial photographer wants you to quickly mention the education grants from EP.
That must be Andrew
That
Buchanan.
is
Yes.
indeed.
For Yes, for those of you who are full-time college students in the United States or Canada, editorial photographers, editorialphoto.com is sponsoring education grants, which are this year we're giving away six $1,000 grants, tons of prizes that include um, a, a year of PhotoShelter, a year from BlankBid, a one of the winners gets an Photofolio website. We have software from PhotoQuote and lists from Fresh List, and then the grand prize winner is going to be selected by my personal hero, Elliot Erwitt, will win a Sony A850 camera with 24 to 70 2.8 Zeiss lens. So it's a
Nice.
very cool thing. So that's a contest that those of you who are students, please take advantage of. We've had great winners in the past, and I'm really looking forward to seeing some of the work that's out there today.
That's editorialphoto.com in case you missed that. Shooting through some career plateaus from staff to freelance. I
Uh-huh.
guess we've kind of talked about the transitions, but shift your style, but keep your identity as a shooter. Some of these concepts are great.
Yeah, so we'll show a little bit if we go into the slides, and I'll kind of show how one of the best things you can do is take what you're doing, today and um, and apply it to the next level. And this is like the one thing, it's like for everybody out there the one point I try to hammer home is don't wait for your big break. Go out there right now and raise the level of your game. So these are two photographs. The photograph on the left I shot for the Miami Herald of story on gay Mariel refugees. This was for their Sunday magazine Tropic. And the photo on the right was taken about the same time for Rolling Stone on women in the military. And the key to all this stuff is like, both of those pictures ended up in my portfolio. It's like you can immediately, if you want to reach the level of Sports Illustrated or Rolling Stone, don't wait for them to call and then suddenly think you're going to hit it out of the park right then and there. It's like you have to do it immediately. So make the most of your opportunities and, shoot. If you want to get to the next level, shoot everything like you're shooting for your dream job today.
Were you doing a lot of kind of personal work or experimentation during this time to, to work on your lighting or to develop your personal style?
Well, actually, I'm a big believer. I think one of the great things about newspapers is, I didn't think it was so great at the time, but when they hit you with two, three, four shoots assignments a day, it's a much faster pace than magazines. But I always tried to, really put a lot of effort into every shoot. And I think one of the great things of that is you have so many opportunities to go out there and shoot great pictures. And I've tried in addition to some projects that we'll show in a minute, I tried to always, use the assignments that were dropped on my lap as a way to, you know, create a new style and move to the next level and not just count on work outside of that. So here as we're talking in terms of developing a personal style, I think one of the things that's really important is to build on what you're already doing, and instead of there's a lot of talking about like reinventing yourself, and I think to me it's much more evolution than really a revolutionary process. It's a case of use what's really working for you to move you on to the next level, and look at the difference between, for me it was a huge difference in magazine versus newspaper. I would show the same pictures that were in the newspaper that I'd kind of be labeled slick, and when your fellow newspaper photographers label you as slick, they don't mean it in a good way. So it was like too slick for them, and just like, oh, he put a light up there, what's he doing? But the same pictures I would show to Jim Rohrig, who was the um, president and owner of Outline, which syndicated my work at the time and actually still does. I would show Jim the pictures and he'd go, wow, this is really raw and edgy. And it was like, wow, okay. So it's like you realize there's a different perception and different aspects of the industry. And I think that's really important to, be aware of.
If you have any questions, you can use the little GoToWebinar control panel on the right of your computer, and we'll try to answer them as we go along. Going back to this Olympics photo from 1984.
Yeah, so what I wanted to show here is sort of a case of, so here I'm building on an image that I did at the 1984 Olympics that really was a case. This is I'm walking to the very top of the stands and shooting from, the cheap seats at the stadium, the very top row as the backstroke was starting off. But it's a picture of like composition and repetitive shapes that then I'm trying to segue from this into the magazine work that I'm doing. So going from that into a story on triathlete fashion, it's like I want to apply the same things that have been successful for me as a sports photographer to, basically a portrait shoot. And these, these same fundamentals, you don't really have to reinvent yourself. You just take what you've been doing successfully to the next level.
Daryl Henderson has a question about, with all of the competition that's around nowadays, what do you think are good and effective ways to get work in front of people that are actually doing the hiring or doing the purchasing or the commissioning of photos?
Well, I think in terms of the medium, it's different actually for everybody you approach. I know there are certain photo editors that have and art directors that haven't opened up a piece of direct mail in 10 years, and there's also those who will never open up an e-promo. So I think in a way you kind of have to try everything, but it really boils down to the success of anything, how good the images are. So you want a strong body of work, and then there's a lot of good ways to get it out there. And one of the great things today is you don't have to stick with one single stream. It's you can send something out as a printed piece to key editors on your list, but you can also um, create a body of work on your website and put it on Facebook, tweet it out, use social media to get other people who you may not even know might come across this work. So I think it's actually never been easier than it is today, um, to get your work out to people. It's just
Hmm.
there's a lot of work out there, so you do need to give it a little extra effort.
Here's one of Jeff Gordon.
Yeah, and so the same thing with Jeff. It's really I'm using the same sort of like the eye for graphics and composition. But the great thing now is like I'm not stuck shooting Jeff during a race. This is a fashion shoot that we did at Homestead Racetrack, and I've got the chance to shoot him in a place where you would expect Jeff Gordon to be, which is a racetrack, but you know, standing in the middle of the racetrack in a suit like you wouldn't expect. But, even though everything that I do is very, very controlled at this point, I'm still looking sort of as a photojournalist for that little bit of unexpected. His tie was blowing in the wind, so I actually turned to the stylist and said, "Let's pin the tie." And he said, "Do you want me to pin it down?" I'm like, "No, let's pin it up." So it's a case of, looking for that little thing that happens and, incorporating, that little bit of the natural into a photograph to kind of loosen it up.
Scott McDonald wants to know what lessons you didn't learn as a newspaper photographer that are applicable as a magazine photographer.
Well, I think one of the things that I was kind of learning at the time the hard way on my own is that um, just realizing the differences in expectations. Where I would go in, and I remember one of the first big newspaper portrait shoots I did of a celebrity was photographing John Huston when he did Prizzi's Honor, and it was one of those things. It's like I was queued up with, six other newspaper photographers who all, would get 5 minutes at the end of a 25-minute interview, and I had all these lights set up, and it was sort of like, John Huston walked out and I was like, oh my God, what is this? This is just a picture for the newspaper. And I turned to him and I said, well, there's small pictures and there's John Huston pictures. This is a John Huston picture. So it's like, he got it and he kind of laughed along, but it's like I realized that, I was already realizing right then that to get to the next stage to do what I wanted to do for magazines, I had to put so much more into each shot. And you get a chance. Fortunately, the good thing is you get more time, so you can kind of plan, but you have to use that time.
Everybody wants to know how you lit the shot. So 10 seconds or
Oh,
less, how
okay.
did you light the
Hey,
shot?
it's super, super simple. Almost everything that I light starts with, if I'm shooting outdoors, the first light is the sun. So we've got ambient on him, but of course, if this is, 10 o'clock in the morning in Florida, it'd be kind of harsh. So there's a big octabank off to the right side of the frame, basically lighting him up. So I, immediately start with ambient, then add the key light, and if at that point I put all the effort into making that key light in the absolute perfect place. And if I can light it just with basically, the sun and, the sun that I move around, the key light, that's when I stop. I don't add a second, third, fourth, fifth light unless there's a reason for them. So this, like a lot of the stuff you'll see, is like one, you know, big old light from one side of the frame.
It's great. So then all of a sudden you have magazine covers like this one with Chrissy Martin.
Yeah, and this is actually, this I was telling you is kind of a good example of that little bit extra where for any of you who shot at Sports Illustrated will know you basically get a grocery list of the 16 shots that they need photographed for the piece and all the variations that are, just that you go through these whole things. And at the end of this, it's like we'd done everything on the checklist, checked everything off. And in a way, it was almost like shopping for groceries, but not making the meal, where I'd done each and everything that was asked for, but not, I hadn't done anything for myself. So at the very end, she's tired, we're tired, this is a long day, but I said, can we do one more shot? And she sort of looked at me like, I'm a boxer, right? But she's like, okay, sure. So I set up a 4x5 and we did literally 4 sheets of 4x5 of this picture, and threw it in with the take with everything else. Put it on top, of course. That's the key. It's like you always want them to know. So I put it on top. Got a phone call a week and a half later saying, got fantastic news. You got the cover, and the wild part, it's not even a picture we asked for. So that's the case. It's like if I hadn't shot those 4 frames, would not have had a magazine cover. So going that extra mile, making sure that you take care of what your client wants, but then also make sure you shoot what they need, even if they didn't ask for it.
Scott Brower wants to know how you get from getting an editor saying, "Oh, we'd love to work with you sometime," into actually getting an assignment.
Perseverance, man, honestly. And that's the case. It's like I can't tell you how many times in those early years I would I would go up to New York at least twice a year and try to see editors. I mean, today it's like a little bit easier because basically what you can do, every single thing that I do in terms of promotion or marketing is to try to drive people to the website. Your website today is the most important marketing tool that you've got. It's like that's the first thing that you want to make sure that you've absolutely got a great website, and everything that you do, every promo you do, um, every time you've got something on Facebook, it's one more thing that drives people to the website. So in a way, back in the day, I had to go in with a book and physically go editor to editor, but today they can kind of get a sense of you and how you're growing from your website. So you want to constantly update it. You don't want the same website for 3 years. Um, so I think like little tweaks and changes, and showing people that you're working on new projects is really important. And
Talk about new projects.
yeah, there we go. So new projects, perfect segue. Thank you out there for that question. So okay, so here's the other thing. It's like you want to move from one thing to the next, and the catch 22. So I was already shooting when I was in newspapers for Rolling Stone, but I was mostly doing photojournalistic stories for them, and I wanted to do more celebrity portraiture. And you're in that catch 22 that it's like you can't just call up Julia Roberts and go, Julie, baby, I want to do some pictures for my book. What are you doing this weekend? You've got to find a way that you can, you've got to find a way that you can show people that, if you want to do professional sports, it might be doing high school sports. If you want to do celebrity, I went out and I was looking for a project that could kind of show people that I could work with performers that were larger than life, which leads to the next slide right here of I was watching CNN one day and Dixie Evans came on, and Dixie was absolutely phenomenal, talking about she was the Marilyn Monroe of strippers. That's Dixie on the left. And I was thinking, God, that is the type of assignment that I want. Wouldn't that be a dream assignment? And sat there for 5 minutes like a dope. And then I was like, well, shoot, I could just make that my dream assignment. So I contacted her, told her I wanted to come out and photograph her. She was delighted. It was a case that I got to, essentially give another 15 minutes of fame to people very much deserving. I mean, if you look at today, it's like, all those 15 minutes of fame seem to be sucked up by Charlie Sheen, that you want to distribute it
Right.
around a little bit. And, you know, give somebody else their chance to, winning. So here is a chance that I went out and photographed Dixie, and we just had an absolutely wonderful day. And then from that shoot, she started talking about all of her friends, and turns out Dixie had lots of friends who were strippers back in the 1950s. So we continued this as a project over several years, and it was very strange. We were the only people there photographing only 70 and up. So it must have seemed very strange for the 20-year-old girls to walk up after their act in G-strings and pasties and say they were ready for their photo. And I'd say, please come back in 50 years. But that that essentially was what interested me, is in terms of telling the story of the burlesque legends. Um,
What was
so
the decision to shoot them outdoors is more environmental?
Well, we started off with Dixie lived on a goat ranch out in the middle of the California desert, halfway between Los Angeles and Las Vegas, and it just was this perfect setting. So it just seemed natural to shoot her where she was, and then we continued through the rest of them. This is Flame O'Neill and Janine, the Eiffel Tower, France, and Janine is the woman with the Madonna in the background. On the right frame, which is this is actually in her kitchen, above her kitchen sink, the Madonna. So it was like a wonderful chance to kind of document a part of history, which at the time kind of seemed like this might be a part of Americana that was fading away. So um, um, it also, it both served as a great project for me to be able to go out and photograph legends like This Is Tempest Storm, um, but also show what I could do if I was out shooting celebrities. So these pictures got a fair amount of play at the time, and I know everybody's wondering, like, how do you possibly go from shooting burlesque dancers to celebrities? What could possibly be the similarity between a burlesque dancer and a celebrity? And here we go, Donald Trump. So it's really a case that when you learn to work with personalities who are, performers and larger than life, you're you get more and more comfortable around them. So on this shoot, this is one of the other differences in terms of doing magazine celebrity portraiture versus doing news photography, is so much of the crew that you bring to the shoot. We had gone the day before, scouted this location. My wife and I worked together, and we saw this wonderful swan fountain at Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach. And just, the immediate thought right away is Donald Trump, angel wings, right? I know you're all thinking that. So we decided to do that. My wife, is the ballsy stylist, called up the store that she already had all the suits reserved that she'd pulled for the shoot, and said, put everything back, give me every single suit that you have, every single white suit that you have in a 42 long, and basically we showed up with nothing but white suits. So, you know, His people were, of course, sort of wondering, while he doesn't wear white suits, he's not going to be comfortable with this. The Donald being the Donald walked in, saw my wife, and said, "Ah, white suit. I've always wanted to be photographed in a white suit. I think I'll look really good in a white suit. Don't you think I'll look good in a white suit?" And so, of course, we said, "Yes, Donald, you look fantastic." So, sometimes just knowing how to work with people makes all the difference, and surrounding yourself by a crew that's brighter than you are makes everything happen.
What sort of pre-planning is necessary for these types of celebrity shoots?
Well, this is a good example where we really had the concept going in. Had a phone call from uh, uh, Dietmar Liz Lopez of Time Magazine, and Dietmar asked, like, "Are you available to go to the British Virgin Islands to photograph Richard Branson for a Time Magazine story on Virgin Galactic of him wearing a spacesuit?" And I was like, "Dietmar, you had me at British Virgin Islands." So, I mean, it's a great concept. Richard Branson's a very savvy guy, and one of the great things about like making a pitch like that is if you're dealing with people that are smart and savvy in this business, he signed off on it right away. And this was the most difficult thing on the shoot was getting this spacesuit down to the Caribbean. This is from a costume house in Los Angeles, and this was probably 75% of the total budget is getting the suit there. We went in the day before, scouted this location, was talking to him that night at dinner, said I'd love to do a picture at the first light of dawn when the sun comes up in the Caribbean. And he's like, "Brian, the sun comes up at 5:30 in the morning." And before I could say another word, "You and I need to be on the boat at 5." So
Wow.
how amazing is that? It's like going out. And oh, and by the way, this is Christmas Eve morning, 5 a.m. I'm on a boat with a billionaire headed out to this little jetty of sand off of his private island. So this is, this is when life is pretty good, doing all this stuff. So this is again that one big bank light off from the side. We started with the beautiful daylight, but then also you got to be able to kind of control it and give it that extra little punch. So start with your base exposure, give it a little bit more light, and this is one of probably 6 setups that we did, but this is very early in the shoot. We felt like this was going to work very, very well. So that's a case you plan ahead, and then it's just you go out and execute.
And the vignetting is in camera, just a remnant of
Oh,
being so wide open? Or?
that's actually, this is a medium format digital back, and actually those things shoot really, really, really flat, which I love. It's um, sort of like shooting medium format color negative film as opposed to a chrome. So we gave a lot of the punch and color later, and I always joke that I use the vignette adjustment, the opposite of the way that it was intended by in Lightroom, where it was like intended to remove vignettes, and I use it to put them in. So I've always loved the look of like a super angulon lens or like a 21, where you've got that gradual fade to the corners so that the emphasis goes to the center. So I do that. Throw
And
in just a little bit of a vignette.
how big is the crew on this sort of shoot, and what's in your typical lighting kit?
Our crew was myself and my wife. We actually got the last 2 rooms, which was Richard Branson gave up his private apartment on the island because the island was fully booked with his friends for the Christmas holidays. So it's like there was 1 room left on the island. So it's myself and my wife. She's the stylist, and also making sure this big Elinchrom Octabank doesn't blow over. And this is one light, like a 6-foot Octabank off to the side. This is actually one of the very first production Profoto Acute B battery packs, a
Yeah.
600 watt second battery pack, which has absolutely saved my life from the number of times that I tried to schlep 7Bs down to the Caribbean. It's like suddenly I'm taking 2 packs in the same weight that I used to take 1. So that's the other key, is like you always have the backup. Even if you're going to shoot with 1 light, you have the second light just in case anything goes wrong, because
Yeah.
it only goes wrong when you don't have the backup. So
And then, of course, everybody needs some nude golf in their portfolio.
You've got to have nude golf. The best thing you can hear as a photographer is the words, "We have an assignment that's perfect for you," and it only way that can get better is if the next words out of the photo editor's mouth were nudist golf. And so this is a shoot for Sports Illustrated, and here's an example of the shelf life of a lot of promos. This was a direct result of the series on burlesque that I had done, 10 years earlier, and the photo editor still had the promo on her desk and was like, I'd worked with her since, but she like for 10 years she was waiting for the right type of project to drop in my lap. And so, that's the other thing about it is like you've got to realize as you're doing these things, they're not going to pay off immediately. It's those back to those little breaks that move you to the next thing. It's like you do good work and you never know when it's going to pay off. It can have a shelf life, and it led to this wonderful assignment on nudist golf for Sports Illustrated. So this series again, entering contests. This was entered in the Communication Arts Photo Annual Awards that year and won that year. And it's a case I could not buy a spread in a source book that would do me as much good as people coming across this in communication arts, because the buyers know that it's in there because it's good work, not because I paid to put it in there. So, that's the wonderful thing in terms of when you do great work, you want to get the most exposure for it. So, in addition to social marketing and direct mail and putting it on your website, it's find the key contests and enter them, and it lets those good the good work that you do generate to more assignments of what you love to shoot.
No, no pun intended with getting more exposure out of the work, right?
Yeah, yeah. So good point there. Yeah, but you gotta love nudist golfers, because I think as a photographer, the other thing about it is we're always trying to capture somebody, and one of the keys to really capturing someone's personality is for someone to be comfortable in their own skin, which pretty much by definition defines a nudist. So
Logan wants to know how much direction you're doing and posing of these types of shots, or I guess any portrait in general.
well, in this case, Logan, a lot of the posing really had to do with covering up the naughty bits. So this was more active posing than we typically do, because it was sort of like, okay, you guys stand over here, but your hands got to go there. You got to hold the flag, Steph, right there. Better move your hand down just a little bit. There we go. So, and actually, the key on this thing was I didn't know till the night before I went out to do the shoot that there were women in this tournament. So it's like I already kind of had everything in mind and like, oh, this just got so much more interesting.
Right.
So, it can be anything from I want you to stand over here against this wall to, if somebody's uncomfortable, it's like how they where they place their weight, how they, which way they turn, which way their face is turned. Or in the case of the three guys on the right, it's just basically we were cracking jokes with them. So it's very loose.
Look back to move forward.
Yeah, and I think this is a key. It's like when you've done all these things, you're really never done. I think one of the things that I've learned from the people that I look at, it's um, back to Elliot Erwitt. Elliot's still out there doing his, projects all over the world. His book Elliot Erwitt's Paris just came out, and he went to nightclubs of Paris to shoot new material for this. It's like you have to go back to the projects that have been successful, keep working, and ultimately this really shouldn't be a job for anyone. This should be an opportunity to have a lifetime of fun. So go back and look at the things that were successful. And one of the things that was really good to me that I showed earlier was the burlesque project. So, a few years ago, we discovered that the Burlesque Hall of Fame had moved from the California desert to Las Vegas. Dixie is still alive and kicking and a ton of fun. And Dixie was still heading up the Burlesque Hall of Fame weekend. So we went out to Las Vegas. And, at this point, the shows are at night. It's, although they're in a desert, they're in an urban desert. So we kind of took a different approach when we went back and did what we could never do before, which is really shoot a lot of the performers. So instead of concentrating on one or two shots out in the desert, we would shoot almost everybody who performed that night. We'd be set up backstage. I typically would have, a 5 foot wide hallway, or where five hallways intersected, and the busiest part of it would be the only place I could set this up. But it's a case of moving people through, and one of the greatest learning experience is to shoot something that's repetitive, where you keep going back and telling different people's stories, but the lighting is set, the background's set, and all that really is going on here is interacting with the performers. So, and I think that's one of the keys. I mean, everybody always wants to know, like, which way is the light. At a certain point, it doesn't matter. It's like you get something lit, you make the light, so it's reasonably pretty, and then you forget about it. You just concentrate on that connection with your subject. So most of these things are done, 4 to 5 minutes, and not worrying about the technical, where it's just we're interacting. It's suddenly it's a very freeing experience. And I think one of the other things, it's like, the red curtain background was sort of tipping my hat to the red drapes that are on a lot of stages. So I wanted something that sort of made more sense than doing another set of photographs on white seamless.
Yeah.
So it makes sense there, but it also kind of disappears as you go through a body of work here, where you're not noticing that. You're just really noticing the performer's interaction.
You mentioned that you're syndicating at least some of your work through Corbis Outline. What's the typical strategy of getting model releases, if you do get any, and what's the stock sale situation like?
Well, typically with editorial licensing, which is 90% of what I do, for editorial licensing, with a few exceptions, like, book covers that end up being used basically as promotion to sell the book, you don't need model releases, and you're not going to get it most of the time with celebrities. Um, in a case of this, for the burlesque project, we've got model releases on everybody. But when I'm shooting celebrities, we're really not we're not getting releases on them. The caveat to all that is you can still get commercial usage for them when the celebrity it's a project the celebrity wants and is looking for photographs. The last person we shot in the studio on Monday was Gene Hackman, and I'd shot Gene years ago for Cigar Aficionado, and of course, it was not a released shoot. He didn't sign any release, but one of the things that performers always do when they do motion pictures is they always have to do a certain amount of publicity. So he needed some pictures for a motion picture, loved these shots, and he signed off on that particular use. So there are times that you can relicense, in this case for a whole lot of money, because the celebrities like the work.
In these burlesque photos, a number of people are asking how much direction you did. I assume because they're performers, they're a little more free to kind of move around and show
Yeah,
their
absolutely.
personality.
Whenever anybody is comfortable in front of a camera, and it doesn't matter if it's like, your next door neighbor who's a huge ham, I always let it start with them, because one of the worst things you can do is, with somebody's very free in front of a camera, is to do what I say is, like, you don't want to step in the way of a good photograph. So when people are doing marvelous stuff in front of a photo, let them roll with it. And then there are some times when something looks really good and they jump onto something else, and I'll take them back to, let's go back to this. So, and we're doing really like the same approach here. This is a project I've been working on for the last 2 years, a book called Art and Soul that will be out from Hachette Filipacci Books in October. And for this project, one of the great pieces of advice I got at the start of my career, when I was only shooting like sports with telephoto lenses, is the director of photography from the Des Moines Register and Tribune said, if you want to be a photographer, you've got to learn how to work with people. So go out and shoot 50 strangers and do a picture that says something about them. So here we go. Here's 50 strangers. This is actually 1/5 of the people that I photographed with the Art and Soul project. Um, and it's a case of like, how do you, if you've got 5 minutes with Sam Jackson, bring out a little bit of life and personality? And I think this is remarkably similar. We're working out at the same time as the Red Drape Burlesque series, and it's almost the same idea where we decided on this very early on just to go with like a very simple black background because I didn't want the backgrounds to fight with the subject. I wanted it all to be about the pose and expression and just, pretty light on the face. And, if I had 5 minutes with somebody, you can't waste time fiddling and tweaking with the light. Pretty much the most I do is kind of kick the light into the spot that I want it to be, and you just shoot. And it's the interaction that you bring out. So I think, again, master the technical, but then be ready to, put it out of your mind. And, it's almost like in a case like this, because you just have the simple portraits against black, it's almost like when some of your senses are taken away, the others are heightened. By taking away all of the distractions in the background, it just really focuses on the personality. And it also was a good choice because I really could have done anything on the first portraits, but had I gone for a location, I would have been out of luck. So, and sometimes you get really, really lucky in terms of people being expressive. And again, with you don't want to stop that. With Dule Hill, it started off. Dule's on the left there, and with Dule, it started off pretty straightforward. You know, handsome guy looking in the camera, and then I brought up the fact I try not to over research people, but I like to find a little bit about them. And I had read that he loves tap dance, so we started talking about that, and he said the greatest honor of his life was being asked um, to tap dance at Gregory Hines' funeral. So,
Wow.
you know, Gregory Hines to him was Elliot Erwitt to me. It's that legend that you look up to. And so it's like, we started him tap dancing, and suddenly that led, to this other shot where he's just improvising. And I think sometimes when you take people to a point where, at this point he's thinking about Gregory Hines, he's not thinking about this photo shoot or the book. I think people get much freer. And then on the right is Adam Bush, who just, every now and then you run into one of these people who's just marvelous in front of a camera and expressive. And, it's like everything is told with like in a headshot. So it's like, watch for those things.
I love these portraits because I think they're not the environmental shots that you've shown in the beginning. They're not the hypersaturation that you have in some of the images, and yet the personality is still coming out so well. I mean, you seem to be. I guess that's one of the reasons why you're one of the top guys. Is there's a mastery of capturing personality.
Well, and this was a departure for me because I think so much of what people were expecting is like we had the option on the first shots to, it was in a mansion in Beverly Hills, and what do? They stick us in the 9 by 14-foot maid's room. And honestly, this is one of the biggest things that you have to learn in this business is how to problem solve, and how when you're stuck in this little tiny room, what do you do? And really the solution we came up with is we wrapped every wall with black just so that the light wouldn't bounce around. So, here's Paula Abdul in our, little tiny set. And I think, this was a learning experience for me because so much of what I did, if you're a Miami photographer, everybody's like, oh, well, we want to see him in blue skies and palm trees because it's freezing here in New York, and, that's the shot. So you kind of do what's asked of you, but sometimes going out and finding a project like this originally was going to be a 3-day project to support the arts that ballooned into um, 18 days of shooting with the Creative Coalition, with sponsorship by and support by Sony to go around to Oscars twice, the Grammy or the Emmys once, Sundance Film Festival, to photograph now 250 performers as a way of expressing what the arts means to all of them. So basically, they have all co-authored the book with me. We'll have about 120 some people in the final book, and basically each and every one of them is my co-author because each of them has written what the arts means specifically to them. And I think that's one of the things why we got so much cooperation on this, because it's like suddenly you're taking people away from the point where this is no longer about what the publicist wants. This is no longer what the studio wants. It's not what the magazine is telling me to get. It's you got a complete free canvas. It's like when they ask, what do you want me to do? It's like, you know what? This is the one time you can do whatever you want. So I think sometimes that's a very freeing thing. And it actually was a great lesson for me where I've come in so often with concepts. It's like sometimes it's just like, let's just go out and do a shoot.
So everybody was asking about equipment, and I kind of purposely ignored those questions so they could see this shot, which
Ah,
is it's one light, obviously, with black
yep,
flats, right? So that's very
yep.
simple. And then everybody wanted to know, is he shooting medium format, et cetera, et cetera? And so we
Well,
can
I actually,
show
yeah,
you
my
what
my
he used.
first my I made the transition. When I first went digital, I went with a medium format back, which was wonderful quality. Like I said, like very open shadow detail, but wow, try to shoot 20 people in a day and you just want to take a nail gun to your head because it's going to shut down 50 times. So I knew I needed something easier, and I was very, very lucky because I was one of the people that Sony approached when they were developing their pro level cameras, the Sony A900, and they did what is like very, very rare in this industry. They asked for opinions instead of saying, "This is the camera that look like we're making. Isn't this fantastic?" They actually asked me what I thought a camera should have, and part of what I threw out there was like, I don't want a raw file that's over processed, because I kind of felt that was the case with some of the 35 millimeter raw files. It's like I wanted that open shadow detail, so I didn't have to like dig in and put detail back where it wasn't. Um, Sony had been making high-end sensors for Nikons and other cameras for a long time, so they had that wonderful expertise. And on top of it, it's like talk about a hook is like when I discovered they had a whole line of autofocus Zeiss lenses. It was like, wow, done. My absolute favorite lens that I use constantly, that probably 80% of the Art and Soul project is shot with, 100% of the burlesque photos on the red background are shot with the 24 to 70 2.8 Zeiss lens that Sony and Zeiss make together, and it's that's the perfect focal length for portraits, because for like a wide portrait like the horizontal shot of Jeff Gordon, I tend to shoot that maybe 24 millimeter with the subject taking up top to bottom in the frame, and then I'm coming in tighter. I might, instead of changing over to a 50 millimeter lens, it's just, finding that focal length on the dial. And then even for like some of the tight portraits, like the shot of Anne Hathaway is not shot with an 85, a 100, a 135. It's shot, you know, at 70 millimeters. I think actually to me, that matches up with my favorite portrait lens on medium format was a 140 or 150, depending which medium format you were using,
Yep.
was like the perfect sort of that short telephoto. Well, a 140 millimeter lens on 6x7 is 70 millimeters on 35. It's just
35.
that it's you've got that little bit of flattening where it's not like you're up on somebody's face with a 50, but you also are close enough that you can kind of whisper to them. Oh, and then this is one of the other toys that we're going to show. This is, one of the other things in addition to the high-end 24.6 megapixel super cameras. Sony has also come out with this camera that is like, one of my new favorites. It's the NEX5. It's a full APS size sensor stuck in like a little tiny body the size of a point and shoot. And the really cool thing, because the body is so thin, you're actually able to slap an adapter on and use, almost any other type of lens. This is a Leica mount Voigtlander 51.1. So being able to shoot with this little tiny camera and a 51.1 for shallow depth field. So this is off in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, shot with that combination. Wide open 1.1, and then in post I'm giving it sort of this aged feel to the shots. I didn't want to go the full daguerreotype, but I wanted a feel for it. And then one of the other things you can throw on it, this tiny package, is a Lens Baby. So here it is, same camera, NEX5 with a Lens Baby, walking around the streets of New York, just going off and making art. And I love the fact is that it makes it so much easier to have a camera with you, where it's not a case of you have to make the conscious decision, am I going to take this big heavy body with me, but
Yeah.
being able to have like a big chip sensor. This is size of a point and shoot, but it's a it's a big chip in there, so you can get marvelous results with it. And it's just the most the best camera you can have is the one you're going to take with you. So um, that's one of the things that I love, always having a camera tossed in my bag, even if I'm not planning for a shoot. If I see something that's great, I want to capture it.
So of course we have to figure out how you're using PhotoShelter.
Well, I love PhotoShelter, and I learned the hard way of like times that I would go on the road, and typically clients always ask me when I do a shoot to FTP to their site, like, no, 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 we want it on our FTP site. And like twice in a row, I got phone calls going like, oh my God, I can't believe we just deleted the pictures off our server. And in one case I had the files with me, in the other case I really had to scramble to come up with the high res that I'd already delivered. And of course you can't tell the client like, well, you're the knucklehead, it's your problem. It's the client's always right. So it's like, okay, what can we do? So I've learned like now it's like I always post the high res to a private PhotoShelter gallery and send them a link to download. If they insist that, you know, I I repost it to them, I will, but it's like great training that I also immediately get the pictures up on, you know, a private link that nobody else can see, and then suddenly, you know, 3 months later when the photos are published and off embargo, I can just click one switch and suddenly the images are live. So it's saved me so many times that, it's that great insurance policy that, pays for itself again and again.
That's what we love to hear. In case we've seen a couple questions, the small Sony camera that he was using is the NEX5. So here's the final slide, Brian's career recipe. You want to summarize it for us?
Yeah, I mean, the most important thing I was hammering home earlier, shoot what you love to shoot. Go out there, find ways to shoot the work that you love, because if you go out and try to shoot what you think a client wants, you're always going to be reacting to what you think the market is, and you're much better setting the tone for what you want out of your career. So shoot what you love to shoot, and those are typically your strongest photographs. In terms of developing a signature style and technique, it's actually something that it's like I didn't realize that I ever was developing a style, because I'll shoot black and white, I'll shoot color, and I think it's one of those things that like sort of comes about based on the type of work that you love to shoot, and I think it's something that you can evolve with. So I think even those funny pictures I was doing back in college, really were sort of the roots to the work that I'm doing today. And don't forget, like, this is not a sprint. This is a marathon. It's like throughout your career, it's like the second that you feel that you've got it made is probably like, when your career goes down in flames. It's like you constantly, everybody who's successful today is constantly trying to move on to the next thing, or keep doing what's good for them. So, going back to things that were successful, figuring out how you can take it to the next level, incorporating personal projects to show people, this is what I want to be shooting. Nobody can read your mind, show them the type of work that you want, and that type of work is going to gradually propel your career along, one small break at a time. If you get lucky and hit the home run and suddenly have it made for the rest of your career, God bless you. But for most of it's a little bit at a time that takes you from one stage to the next to the next.
You're listening to a webinar with Brian Smith. We actually recorded this, and the full recorded version will be available tomorrow on the PhotoShelter blog at blog.photoshelter.com. In the meantime, you can check out Brian's work at briansmith.com, which also links to his PhotoShelter site, briansmith.photoshelter.com. You can follow him on Twitter at briansmithphoto, and also join his Facebook fan page, facebook.com/briansmithphotography. We've run out of time. I know that there were a bunch of different questions, but you can pose questions to Brian either on his Facebook fan page or on the PhotoShelter fan page, and we'll try to get them answered for you. The PhotoShelter fan page is facebook.com/PhotoShelter. I want to thank the over 2,000 of you who registered to listen to Brian today, and to Brian for extending his time to us. Fantastic stuff, Brian. Thank you so much.
Thanks to the 2,000 members of my family who were able to make it on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us. Stay tuned for more fantastic webinars that we have in the future by looking at our About page, and we'll talk to you all later. Goodbye, everyone.